A revolutionary is a doomed man. He has no private interests, no affairs, sentiments, ties, property, nor even a name of his own. His entire being is devoured by one purpose, one thought, one passion, the revolution. Heart and soul, not merely by word but by deed, he has severed every link with the social order and with the entire civilized world, with the laws, good manners, conventions, and morality of that world. He is its merciless enemy and continues to inhabit it with only one purpose: to destroy it. So, Nechaev's catechism here expresses a revolutionary approach to change, although I think it's one we have, including the revolutionaries amongst us, good reason to find deeply troubling, maybe even irrational. Indeed, in his novel Demons, or The Devils, Dostoevsky employs a lightly fictionalized version of Nechaev to present essentially a murderous nihilist. Such an approach to change strips the status quo of all its authority. It is an approach that would sooner see the world turn to ash than it would submit to acknowledging that the here and now has something of value to it, something that is worth preserving. Of course, between this nihilistic, destructive approach to change and the stubborn refusal, the reactionary stubborn refusal to accept any change of any kind, are going to be a range of dispositions, differing in terms of how much authority the status quo enjoys and how much change those dispositions demand, or at the very least are willing to permit. In this essay, titled Mono no Aware, How Conservatives Should Do Change, I accept not only the existence of non-reactionary conservatives, although I make no claim as to how numerous such folk might be, although I do also accept that all of us have conservative dispositions to varying degrees. So non-reactionary conservatives exist. It's just that the validity of their conservative dispositions are only valid so long as that disposition is appropriately balanced against other dispositions, namely a disposition to, as I put it, accept a degree of epistemic humility with respect to the kinds of change that count as growth or intimation or the continuation of the value contained in some given situation. I'll explain what that means shortly, with reference in particular to George Orwell. Second, a disposition to acknowledge the legitimacy of democratic majorities, even when those majorities are not always going to be expressions of those intimations or that understanding of growth or continuation. And then third, the disposition to help alleviate recognizable injustices as these might be suffered and understood by minorities. So these are three dispositions that exist or must exist to varying degrees alongside any conservative disposition in order for that conservative disposition to be justifiable. So my hope then in this essay is both to describe the non-reactionary conservative as a minimally complex kind of political agent constituted by these differing dispositions, capable therefore of reconciling themselves to forms of change they, perhaps begrudgingly, accept as necessary. To that end, I appropriate the Japanese concept, or maybe the practice, of mono no aware, and in particular a 1933 essay in praise of shadows written by Junichiro Tanizaki. So what then is the conservative disposition that needs to be balanced against these other dispositions, at least as conservatives themselves might understand it? And Michael Oakeshott, in his essay on being conservative, provides a good definition of this disposition. To be conservative, then, is to prefer the familiar to the unknown, to prefer the tried to the untried, fact to mystery, the actual to the possible, the limited to the unbounded, the near to the distant, the sufficient to the superabundant, the convenient to the perfect, present laughter to utopian bliss. Familiar relationships and loyalties will be preferred to the allure of more profitable attachments. To acquire and to enlarge will be less important than to keep, to cultivate and to enjoy. The grief of loss will be more acute than the excitement of novelty or promise. Elsewhere in that same article, Oakeshott describes conservatives as timid and unadventurous. What does this mean then in terms of conservatives' understandings of change specifically? Again, from Oakeshott. Innovation entails certain loss and possible gain, therefore the onus of proof to show that the proposed change may be expected to be on the whole beneficial rests with the would-be innovator. But loss for whom exactly is a question that Oakeshott does not provide an answer for. And then secondly, as a way of countering feelings of loss or preventing too much loss, the more closely an innovation resembles growth, that is, the more clearly it is intimated and not merely imposed upon the situation, the less likely it is to result in a preponderance of loss. But then the question becomes, what is to grow? In other words, which ideas of growth should matter and which should not? Or, to put it another way, whose ideas of growth should matter and whose not? So Orwell, in the following, gives us a sense of a particular kind of intimation that occurs on the other side of a revolution. It is only by revolution that the native genius of the English people can be set free. Revolution does not mean red flags and street fighting. It means a fundamental shift of power. Whether it happens with or without bloodshed is largely an accident of time and place. I dare say the London gutters will have to run with blood. All right, let them, if it is necessary. But when the red militias are billeted in the Ritz, I shall still feel that the England I was taught to love so long ago for such different reasons is somehow persisting. So when George Orwell then is arguing, what he's arguing for here is the change through which England can, as in his words, assume its real shape. An England that was, as he saw it, only just beneath the surface. This is an explicit argument for change in the language of growth and intimation, and a thoroughly democratic understanding of what England might be. Indeed, perhaps one intuitive way to understand what growth and intimation looks like and then to embrace a degree of epistemic humility, that is to suggest that it is not necessarily my view of growth of any given nation or community that should matter, is a commitment to democracy. We are all epistemically humble, therefore we commit to democracy as a process through which we discover what intimation looks like. In addition, and I'm going to bracket this for the purposes of this video, conservative, I argue, should learn how to accommodate themselves to the demands of democratic majorities, which is something Oakeshott singularly fails to do. So one might have thought his feelings of, I quote, sadness rather than exhilaration in the face of massive post-war improvements in English context could be somewhat assuaged by the fact that millions upon millions of people now enjoyed secure tenures in houses with running water, heating, and adequate space. Changes, then, are inevitable and oftentimes to be welcomed. Indeed, the conservative themselves, so long as the pace of change is tends to preserve rather than simply destroy, can also welcome them, right? That's part of my argument, is that the conservative disposition is valuable so long as it's balanced. However, part of what the conservative needs to learn in this process of accommodating change, reconciling himself to change, is a sense of how precisely to navigate those changes in appropriately conservative ways. So in the essay, I suggest that even when people, and I note important work that's done by G.A. Cohen, Samuel Scheffler, and Orwell, even when these people acknowledge the balancing imperative, the fact that this conservative disposition has to give way, right, they do not demonstrate how conservatives might in fact engage. They might go about the actual work of that balancing. So it's with just that task in mind then, I suggest a suitably complex, non-reactionary conservative can draw lessons from Japanese philosophy, specifically aesthetics, the concept of mono no aware, and in particular the work of Junichiro Tanizaki. Okay then, so to first define this particular idea, mono no aware, which runs through Tanizaki's work and which informs the particular use I wish to make of it. So it literally means the pathos of things, or a sensitivity to ephemera. And as I've said, it's more commonly associated with Japanese aesthetics, especially in literature and the cinema. So Donald Ritchie, he defines it in the following way: a kind of content resignation, an observance of the way things are and a willingness to go along with them. It advocates experience the basic nature of existence, savoring the comforts of being in harmony with the cycles of the universe, an acceptance of adversity, and an appreciation of the inevitable. So although Tanizaki makes little explicit mention of politics in his essay In Praise of Shadows, and certainly nothing on democracy or justice, I think connections between politics and the spirit of mono no aware are not hard to find in this work. In what follows, I'm going to draw on In Praise of Shadows, Tanizaki's essay on Japanese aesthetics, written against the backdrop of Japan's rapid entry into modernity and the destruction that this precipitated for a traditional Japanese way of life, in order to flesh out the ways in which cultivating mono no aware can help conservatives of all kinds, of the non-reactionary kind, navigate those tensions between the various, or can work out the balancing that needs to occur between these dispositions, right? So I suggest then that Tanizaki, he contributes to this navigational work in the following 4 ways. First, there is the charting and detail of the losses to both art and, most crucially, a la Oakeshott, to the routines of everyday life that were then, in the 30s, being caused by contemporary developments in technology, production, and the wide availability of new cheap materials. Second, there is his frank and open recognition that modern developments have also produced significant benefits for others, and, if in a more limited sense himself, even as these changes are causing the losses that he laments with respects to ordinary Japanese practices and ways of life. Thirdly, by drawing attention to the specifics of Japanese aesthetics, its distinctive qualities, and the traditional values that were being undermined by modern developments, Tanizaki hoped in some way to preserve some spaces where traditional Japanese tastes could still be honored. So in this way, Tanizaki is identifying sites worthy of preservation against the pressures of change. And so this then is the space where conservatives are at their most activist and their most useful. Fourth, and finally, Tanizaki, often it should be said with great humor, is keen to reconcile himself and those similarly moved by Japanese approaches to beauty, to consumption, to taste, to get them to reconcile themselves to the changes that were being wrought by modernity, where that tension between traditional and more modern imperatives is resolved in favor of the latter. Some of these traditional Japanese practices, these approaches to everyday life, whether it's cuisine or certain festivals, can perhaps be preserved then without cost. So take the consumption of miso soup. So it might be possible to preserve this. So during Tanizaki's writing of the essay, there was this tendency to serve them in porcelain bowls. And this was something that he resented, that he didn't think was necessary. And he enjoyed the muddy clay-like color, quiet in a black lacquer bowl beneath the faint light of a candle. It would seem that for all the developments in modern life, there is a way to preserve this specific moment in the Japanese way of life, right, that preserves this kind of experience. Similarly, maybe more broadly, there's ensuring that the moon viewing festivals that are famous, that are a large part of the mid-autumn Japanese calendar, right, that they can proceed without the use of speakers and floodlights, right? So this was something that was, again, happening with the development of, right, the wide availability of electricity, that people were ruining these moon viewing festivals through the addition of these additional technological accoutrements. Right. However, it might be impossible. So there's Tanizaki, for instance, refers to the older style of Japanese toilet and the opportunities for meditation and repose that they offered. The joys of listening to rain falling onto moss. This was also a space where poetry might be composed, right? For him, and he tried and failed. It was likely that he tried to install these a traditional Japanese toilet in his home. It's likely that these won't be preserved into the future, where convenience, the availability of cheaper products, easiness to maintain, and hygiene are going to win the day. So from this perspective, and to quote from Jerry Cohen, the proposition that humankind is a net beneficiary of modernization is not a reason for not lamenting what has been lost. So where some conservatives might adopt a more combative politics of resistance to help them pursue their preference for, to quote Oakeshott, the familiar, and act on their various laments with respects to change, even as they will recognize the considerable benefits that a great many other people could thereby enjoy, Tanizaki, and in a way that Cohen's conservatives could endorse, doesn't entertain that possibility. He accepts that many of these things will have to fade away as part of ordinary Japanese life. And so his commitment then is only to adopting a disposition to value that which he believes has value. This is not a commitment that fills out an entire political attitude to change. To be sure, someone like Roger Scruton might dismiss what I've described here in the work of Tanizaki as antiquarian, consigning its subject to inaction and nostalgia. Tanizaki's various concessions in this essay, his willingness to attempt some kind of reconciliation with modernity for a complex set of reasons, namely the tastes of the masses, the expense of continued preservation, the considerable gains modernity had precipitated for Japanese people considered as a whole, might well put him on the wrong side of Scruton's distinction between true conservatism and mere conservation. But I think so much the worse for the true conservative, who seems, on this view, to be inevitably thrust by the supposed authenticity of his conservatism into reactionary postures. Tanizaki, guided instead by the melancholy aesthetic of Mono no Aware, which pervades this essay in Praise of Shadows, offers a complex conservatism, one that can accept change, one that can balance the conservative disposition with those others, even as it expresses sadness and respect for what gets lost in the teeth of that change.